Hello, welcome to Progress Reimagined, a show that explores innovative ideas, technologies, and emerging economic models that put humanity first. The show challenges assumptions to reshape how we think about progress and prosperity. I'm Kathleen, your host. I'm very glad to be with you today. Let me start by asking you a question. Have you ever wondered what will happen next in our current stage of civilization? That sounds like a big question. And civilization is a broad term that basically refers to how kind of our society, social and cultural development developed, and how simply we coordinate and live together. And my guest today will share his views on how a new development of civilization has emerged. As a keen observer of emerging digital P2P movements and blockchain technology, Dr. Michel Bauwens has identified what he calls the fourth civilization. Basically, a new world order that transcends traditional geographic boundaries. So in this episode, we will dive into his groundbreaking insights from Chiang Mai, Thailand, where he's documenting the emergence of Civium, a new form of human organization that could reshape how we live, how we work, and build communities in the digital age. A quick intro of Dr. Michel Bauwens. He's a thought leader and a researcher in the area of the commons. He founded the P2P Foundation, where he leads groundbreaking research on how communities can work together and share resources more effectively. His research includes translocal collaboration and resource sharing, contributing to our understanding of how society can thrive together in our changing world. A respected author and advisor, he has helped cities and organizations worldwide develop plans for a future based on collaboration rather than competition. His valuable work focuses on how communities can join forces to address global challenges, particularly through digital networks and local cooperation. His latest blog post on translocal communities essentially explains how the digital world enables new ways to coordinate human labor and knowledge translocally at a global scale. We will share it in the show notes, so don't worry if you can't find it. So he basically believes we have entered a fourth form of civilization in what he'd like to call the Cosmolocal civilization. So welcome, Michelle. Very nice having you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Happy to be here.
Great. And so I want to start by asking you, what's that one thing many people think it's true, but it's not true in your field?
Well, that was a bit of a difficult question, but I came up with the idea of techno solutionism, which is basically kind of the philosophy that every problem can be solved with technology. And I don't think that's the case. I think basically everything is techno social. So it's not sufficient that it's a technology. It has to be backed by, the right kind of social power and the willingness of majorities to go along with it. It has to has legitimacy, and of course, one of the problems in the Web3 field, which is a bit my current environment, is this thinking in terms of like pure technology.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, I say, okay, they know computer science, they know game theory, and they know ocean economics, and they think that's enough to understand the world. And I think that that leaves out so many important causation that is social, psychological. So I think they're doing really good stuff, really important stuff, but I don't think they can do it alone. So that would be why we need alliances between many different kinds of groups in order to successfully change anything.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate that insight. I understand you were once a librarian, and it's pretty much kind of in line of how you document the latest developments. If you can share a little bit of what inspired you to transition from being a librarian to focusing on P2P research.
Yes, so I was into, what is commonly called knowledge management. So it's not IT, but it's the flows of knowledge that use IT. I worked 9 years for the U.S. information agency, not to be confused by the CIA. The USIA is like more like the British Council and Alliance Française, those types of organizations, the Goethe Institute. Then I worked for British Petroleum, the agro feed division, which nobody knows, but was huge. It had 25,000 people. Was producing almost the majority of animal feed in the world back in the early 90s. Then I also created two startups, internet startups in the 90s, and I ended up being the director of digital strategy for a large telco in Belgium, which is called Belgacom. And basically, in the mid 90s, there two things happened. First of all, I started seeing, a lot of signals that the world was moving in the wrong direction. A lot of red lights were starting to blink. Not that we didn't know this, because in the 70s, a lot of people warned us about it, but it became more tangible, I think. And then the other thing, in mid 90s, you have to remember the Zapatistas, which is, a small indigenous army in the middle of Mexico, could have probably easily been, wiped out by the Mexican army if they could have done it. But the fact that the Zapatistas had this broad network of support, digital network of support, made it, very expensive in terms of public relations if they would have done it. And then it's also the time of the anti-WTO demonstrations in Seattle, if you remember that. And so all these things were showing that the network form was emerging as a very powerful way to organizing humanity and to mobilize a lot of people. And at the same time, in my job, I was thinking, like, am I solving anything here, or am I making things worse? And I could not convince myself that, the kind of job I had was basically solving any of the world's problems. And I thought, okay, what can I do? So I took a 2 year sabbatical and I studied civilizational transitions for first time between 2002 and 2003. So I took 2 years for this. And, that led to a number of conclusions. So I moved to Thailand, met my current wife, and created a P2P Foundation. And by 2005, I became like a full-time, you know, I wouldn't say activist, but researcher activist maybe is a good word, and started studying more seriously and sharing insights and publishing reports. Eventually I would go to the Vatican twice. I did a commons transition plan for the government of Ecuador, for the city of Ghent. I advised the Union of Freelancers for 3 years. So I kind of became a consultant for relatively large organizations, and basically helping them in their transitioning to kind of new kind of situation. Maybe to be precise, I don't think we are in the fourth civilization yet. I think we're in the chaotic transition towards it, but that we can witness many seed forms that can give us a prefigurative idea of where we are going. So I very much believe in seed forms. And what that means is, if the existing society is no longer able to solve its problems, and when people gradually lose trust in the institutions and in the press and everything that you can see, especially in the Western countries nowadays, then what you have to do is really look at seed forms. So people leaving the system to solve these problems in another and new way. And by looking carefully at those seed forms, I think you can make informed, guesses and models about where we are going. And so I would say the two key patterns that I see are, one is peer to peer, and the other one is the commons. We can maybe talk later a bit more about those two patterns.
Yes, yes. What did you mean by C form? I couldn't quite catch that.
A seed form, like a seed. So
Okay.
if you don't mind, I can give you an example. So,
Yes, please.
in Europe, we lived in feudalism, right? Which is based on the land. You have lords and you have people who work on the land. They cannot leave the land, right? It's called feudalism. And then by the 11th century, the cities come back. And then what you see is, first of all, you see religious innovation, the invention of purgatory. Before purgatory, if you were a Christian, you could not lend money, you would go straight to hell. Once you have purgatory, it's defined as a minor sin. You can buy an indulgence, like, merit making in Buddhism. And then, the Catholic Church would build cathedrals with that money. But then as a Christian, you can become a business person. You can lend money and you can invest. You're no longer sinful. So that's like an ideological hack, right?
Okay.
Then you have a monk who invents double entry book accounting, which basically allows corporations to emerge and to manage their assets. And then the printing press is invented, which allows very rapid dissemination of information. Now, those three are seed forms that eventually would find each other. So you get a printing press, which becomes a small enterprise using double entry book accounting, right? And it's no longer sinful, so they can do it. But these are the seed forms of what later would become capitalism. Eventually, these different seeds find each other,
Got it.
and within the older society, which is degrading, because eventually in the 14th century, feudalism would enter into a deep crisis, then the capitalist seed forms become stronger and stronger until eventually they become the dominant model. And so basically, that's my argument. Now we see the seed forms that are based on networks, organized networks with commons that use peer to peer coordination. And those are, in my view, the seed forms of a coming society that is based on a new relationship between geography and not geography. And so I call it translocal, right? The massive capacity for translocal self-organization.
Right. Okay.
And why does that change civilization? Because civilization is a geographic arrangement between the rural and the urban. So the rural needs to produce a surplus to feed the city and its specialized people. And that's basically what civilization is, because before we had tribal, based on kinship, right? And without markets and states. Then suddenly we have civilization with classes, castes, division of labors, independent armies, and a very complex society using market and states as coordination mechanisms. And so 5,000 years ago, this shifted from tribal to civilization. And I'm saying it's shifting again.
I
So
see.
it's like a 5,000-year break, and that peer-to-peer and commons-based forms are going to be the main form of coordination and
Mm-hmm.
value exchange.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying basically, I'm not saying markets and states will disappear, but what I'm saying is they're not able to solve the current problems, and so something needs to be added to the mix in order to solve the problems that, in a way, our very success has created. Right? It's not because necessarily because everything is bad that is changing, is because we are successful in so many ways that we create new problems that need to be solved by a high level integration and complexity.
Right. Got it. So basically, is you're seeing the early formation of the start of a fourth
Right.
civilization.
Yeah.
Great.
I'm identifying those seed forms. I'm looking at how they interconnect, and I'm looking what kind of social forces align around these new potential, which social force eventually try to derail it, which ones try to control it, how then there's a struggle within these new configurations, and I find everything interesting, and I see how every domain of human activity is changed by those new dynamics. So peer-to-peer dynamics and commons-based dynamics. So when I say an organized network with commons, you may be familiar with the word DAO, a distributed autonomous organization, right? What's a DAO? A DAO is a meta container. It allows you to do market dynamics. It allows you to have relationship with the state and public authorities. It allows you to have voluntary contributions, what we call permissionless contributions. It's an open ecosystem. It basically has the potential to replace the corporation, because it does more than a corporation. And imagine a big corporation, let's say IBM. It can have 5,000 researchers. If you have a network with 50 companies that connect together in a knowledge commons, they can also easily have 5,000 researchers. And that wasn't possible before, right?
Right.
And that's why IBM is forced to adapt to Linux, and it has influence in Linux, but it doesn't completely dominate Linux. It has to go to the Linux Foundation, and the culture of the community is in balance with the influence of the corporation. It's not like employees and an employer. It's something different. It's different stakeholder communities having to find alignment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's a very different situation.
Right. I guess Linux is a good example to kind of really highlight that open source aspect of the technology that and the stage that we're in at this moment. I think before, go ahead.
I just want to make clear that people understand the different dynamic, right? So in the old dynamic, let's say I'm the capitalist and I hire you, and you, in order to survive, you have to sell your labor to me. And if you're lucky, the job is interesting. For most of the people, it's not. Only one out of five of people say that they're happy and find meaning in their jobs. The moment you don't pay them, they're gone, right?
Right.
In Linux, it's different. You have an open ecosystem. Everybody can, with the skills, can write free software, doesn't have to ask anybody's permission. So they're all motivated 100% to do it. It's the passionate engagement of your skills that is the prime. So it's contribution, not commodity labor. And yet around that, that combination of people who get paid or not paid to do free software, a whole economy emerges, which is today basically the dominant form of the software economy. It's not marginal anymore. You know, Apple uses open source software. It modified it and built things on top of it, but its operating system used open source software. Musk uses open source software. Amazon uses it, right? They all now need it in order to be what they are as a corporation. They all now depend on open source communities, and they have to respect the culture of these open source communities. It doesn't mean they have no influence, but it's a very different influence than having employees that you can tell and that you can tell them what they have to do.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now IBM maybe has 2,000 people working in Linux, but there are 25,000 of them, and maybe 70% of work for pay, and 25% work because they want to solve problems on their own.
Right.
A different ecosystem.
So it's becoming more fluid, I guess, in terms of how society contribute, how participants in the society contributes. And how would you say that with the introduction of the blockchain technology, kind of changing that landscape of the open source contribution? Do you think that it's injecting a new way to where value is
Absolutely.
created?
Yeah. So let me phrase this in kind of like in a historical way, in a chronological way.
Okay.
So in '93, we democratized the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, it was a few thousand scientists, most of them in the defense departments of the US. Now suddenly it opens up, right? And what it does is that millions of people start sharing knowledge and organizing projects on a translocal level. So they no longer have to be together in a physical space. You can now have projects that you organize with people in a different place. Then, when Bitcoin is invented, we have the first socially sovereign currency, a scalable socially sovereign currency, meaning a currency that is no longer controlled by a nation state. And it's not controlled by a corporation. It's based on the trust in a digital protocol. That Bitcoin creates a ledger, and that is the
Mm-hmm.
blockchain, right? That's the first universal ledger in human history. Why is this important? Because so when we invent the ledger 5,000 years ago, that's the beginning of the state. It's a temple in Samaria that manages the flow of rice coming in and out, right? And that's basically the origin of the state who's going to manage the irrigation projects in Mesopotamia. In the 14th century, when a monk invents double entry book accounting, we have private accounting, narcissic. Why do I say that? Because you only see what is augmenting in your capital and your profit. You don't see the world, you don't see the impact. And that is the major problem of capitalism, which is that it externalizes everything, and so it can do things cheaply, and then the state or the public or nature pays the price.
Right.
And so we have a system which creates a lot of wealth, but that also at an enormous environmental cost and without regard for the limitations in our resource base.
Yes.
Now we have an open universal ledger. Everything is 3D. You enter not in a corporation, you enter in an open ecosystem. And and there is forms of accounting like contributory accounting. You can start funding things that are not in the market. For example, in the blockchain world, we do funding of public goods. So we tax ourselves in order to pay the people who work on the infrastructure. We tax ourselves without a state, and we fund collective projects outside of the necessity of having a state. But also, we can integrate ecological impacts. For example, there's a project called Region Network. It has a planetary ledger with ecological state, the state of the ecology, like 36 different metrics tell you whether your activity is improving or degrading the environment, right? So that really changes many things that we can do this. We can now work together translocally and we can become aware of our impact,
Right.
right? That's already, in my view, post-capitalist because it changes it's not post-market. There's still markets and markets have their use, but they're not purely capitalist. And if you look at how a DAO coordinates the work amongst these different players, it uses incentives to align stakeholders, right? And capital is a contributor, and so is the coding is a contribution, and so is everybody else who adds value to the network. So the network is primary. It's an organized network. It has a membrane. Within the network, there's a value flow. So people actually get paid, and there's a value flow between networks and between DAOs, right? So it's already $3 trillion flowing in that parallel economy. And there's already 35 million digital nomads, and maybe 10 million of them have crypto wallets and are participating in some way or other in this new layer of the economy, which is a translocal layer of the economy. Now, you could say it existed before, but only for capital, right? Only trans financial capital. We have democratized that capacity.
So what's new, what's changed now is not only the capitals, but also labor, knowledge, and the new ledger system that's enabling
Yes.
this new
And what is
development.
missing, maybe if you allow me to put on the light because it's
Sure,
getting very
it's
dark.
getting dark, of course.
Can you remind me what I was saying?
You were saying about before it was capital, and then now we have the labor, the people with the knowledge, and the ledger system that's really enabling the development into a global scale. And then you wanted to kind of you were just about to say you wanted to kind of first talk about something.
What is missing in the system I just described is basically the link to physical production, right? So most physical production is still done in a traditional way with commodity labor and in a capitalist investment, right? What I'm pushing for in this world that I'm in is to connect all the people are shifting towards resilient production, resilient local production, right? And connect that to this global capacity for coordination and financing of labor. Why is this important? Because I think our world has lost its regulation capacity. So,
Mm,
before capitalism, we had empires. Empires respected the commons, and the commons is, the local institution where people make sure they have common sources for food. And so it's like the welfare system before you have the working class in a way, right? But the capitalist system doesn't believe in common properties, so it encloses the commons and it replaces the regulation system with market and state. So basically, the idea is that the state has to regulate the market. And the whole debate in capitalism has always been for 300 years, do we need more market freedom or do we need more state regulation? That's the big debate. And every 30 years, the other party wins, and you get 30 years of deregulation, 30 years of re-regulation. And this stopped working in the 1980s because transnational finance escaped the nation state, became cybernetic, and created these global supply chains outside of the control of the nation state. And politics have been paralyzed for this time, right? We can vote left or right, doesn't really matter. There's not much that can be done against that force. So what's the solution is either inflate the state and say we need a world government, but that's like a very dangerous future, because it's very far removed from where people are. But you can also say, well, why don't we reinstore and inflate the commons, right? So why don't we think cosmolocally, which is we have a relocalizing of production, which we need to do for environmental reasons, because we spend 2 times as much transporting than making. And you can see there is disruption already in the world. We already have bi-globalization where the techno stack, the financial stack, and the supply chain are splitting in two between the Western Alliance and the Russia-China Global South Alliance. But it goes further. Like with COVID, a lot of countries are thinking about de-risking the supply chain, going back to more local production. But also, if you are like living in a region, you start to think bioregionally. Like, how are we sure that we have food and energy in more difficult times, right? So all this is creating pressure towards relocalization. But the thing is, if you're only local, you cannot withstand the pressure of potentially a hostile nation state, but also, a transnational finance, right? For example, in many countries in Africa, they're forbidden to share seeds because Monsanto comes in and says, "Oh, these seeds are unsafe. You need to buy our Terminator seeds, which don't grow by themselves. So you have to buy seeds every year from the company." So there's a lot of pressure on the local. One of the ways out of this is to connect the local to global commons. So all the people doing permaculture, all the people doing shared transportation, all the people doing permaculture, community land trust, what they can do is they can connect translocally, share their knowledge, invent protocols of cooperation, but also eventually tap some of that crypto capital, right? Regenerative crypto capital. And we now already have bioregional financial mechanisms to regrow bioregional infrastructure that already exists. So that's kind of the more we do this, the more we enter into the seed forms of a new form of economy and civilization that is no longer just geographically organized, but has this on top a layer of translocalism, which can be very, very strong. It's already very strong for transfinancial capital. But what if we have, civic productive communities that organize cosmolocally? Then we have actually a new form of regulation between, investors and the people who, let's say, the managerial and the producing class can find new ways of balancing each other out. That was the role of labor in the industrial society is, fighting over who gets the surplus, right? And that has been largely broken. So we need new ways of and also protecting environment, protecting non-human communities. And I think commons-based institutions are the appropriate response on the condition that they're cosmolocal, that they have enough force to withstand, this other power.
Can you share a little bit about regenerative network for those who don't quite understand?
You have to think about, if you have any economic activity which is always to a certain degree extractive. I mean, we can't help it. We need to eat, we need to build. So humanity, needs to extract. It's nothing bad by itself. The problem, of course, is when you create something more complex locally, you create waste outside, so you increase entropy on
Yes.
your margins, right? When the whole world starts doing that and you don't have a compensatory mechanism, then you're actually enter into a metabolic crisis, and that's what we are, which
Right.
what we
Okay.
are in,
Got it.
right? So we need to find mechanisms to protect nature and to protect, human groups that are affected by this.
Right. Okay.
And societies normally find something like that. They do have these balances. It's never perfect. They always end up dying anyway, but they only die regionally, right? So when the Western Roman Empire falls, Byzantium is still there. Civilization has never disappeared. But what if you have a global civilization and you have exhausted every region of the world? Now, unless you collapse through a dark age and you want to maybe avoid that, what is the global regulation mechanism that we can find? And I'm saying the state is not doing it. The state is no longer the appropriate regulation for the market. It's too weak. And we may not want a stronger state in any ways, right?
Right.
And that's why most people today that want to change the world agree on one thing: this decentralization. That's like whether you're left or right. In Web3, you have both, but they all agree on one thing: we need decentralized infrastructures. We need more autonomy, more freedom, either locally, physically, or locally in the sense of, a specific domain of activity. And okay, so regeneration is the opposite of that. Is, can we imagine human activity which is not just extractive but actually regenerates the world,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
To the degree that we are going to a new situation where, by 250 the world population will start shrinking. It's already started. It's already started, in Korea, in Japan.
Yes.
But by 2050, even Africa will have reached the point where it starts declining in population.
Right.
That's going to be interesting. And there are already proposals from E.O. Wilson, I think it's Edward O. Wilson, who wrote Consilience, but also Half Earth. There's another book called Half Earth Socialism, which is inspired by that. And their idea is, as the human population will shrink drastically, which is a problem in itself, but has a silver lining, which is we're going to use less of the world because we are
Mm-hmm.
shrinking in number.
Right.
But what we will have devastated the world to such a degree that we need to regenerate it, right? So we
Yes.
need to move from efficiency to resilience as a civilization. How do we do that? So have Earth socialism is an interesting idea in the sense that they say, okay, let's concentrate ourselves on half the world with a shrinking population, and we can give back the other half to nature and help it restore its original health.
Right. For someone who has been kind of, we all kind of programmed to believe that, I guess as majority of us, programmed to believe that capitalism is the only way, and it's very hard to picture a post-capitalism world, where, say, nature has, its own right to exist. It's probably unfathomable for, some of the listeners. For someone who just couldn't get why this is so important and why we can't just exist the way we are right now. If you can share a little bit of your views on that.
Right. Well, so the people who look at resources, and there's a group of scientists. They work on something called global thresholds and allocations, right? So you have the table of Mendeleev, 130 commodities. And you can basically look at every commodity and say, okay, how much copper is there? How much copper will we find? And what's the average of findings of copper? What's the biocircularity of copper? So if you use copper, You want to reuse it. How much can you reuse? 70%. So this allows you to make these tables, right? And also to be careful about what's called negative thresholds. Like when there is not enough copper, people start stealing copper and they sabotage the railways because they take the copper from the railways. This is already happening in different countries. It's happening here in Thailand. So you don't want to get there. You want to have a system that you don't get on under those negative thresholds, right? And basically, if everybody would live like the West, we would need 4 or 5 times what we are already using today, and we are already using too much. So we using more resources. That doesn't mean resources are disappearing from one day to the other, but it does mean that once you use half, this is called peak resource, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then it's no longer cheap. The next half is expensive. So for example, fracking, uses 30% energy to get the other 70%. It used to be like 2 or 3%. You needed energy to get more energy. Now you get 1/3 of energy to get 2/3 energy, right? It's much more expensive. And I'm not even talking about the destruction of the environment. I'm just talking here like financially for mining companies. So, so this is a problem. Like the whole world would like to have the same level, and it seems physically impossible. So how do we get out of this? This is not easy. Um, And the idea is, well, we need agreements. That's one. Will we have those agreements? That's very difficult. Usually, historically, it happened after war. And then war is so expensive that people say, "Oh, never again. Let's make a peace deal." And usually, you have hegemonic power which can impose it, like the U.S. after World War II. This time, it's very hard to imagine because everybody has nuclear weapons. So maybe we can make peace before we use the nuclear weapons. That's the hope, right? And then we can have commons-based multi-stakeholder institutions that protect these agreements. That's the way I think about this, right? Now, the other thing we have to imagine is, we don't know how bad it's going to get, but you can have an idea. For example, you look at the United States, and what's happening in the United States. It's getting pretty bad for many people. And even with this, small amount of decay, it is already creating enormous political tension, right? And this can go on and, can get worse and worse over time until there is a moment when people start seeing it's no longer working. We can't just go back, and restore the 1950s. No, it's not working. We need to find something else. And usually what happens is that some of the mainstream institutions start collapsing. And so you have a lot more interstitial territories where people can do new things, right?
Right.
And so then there's another thing I want to show is big changes. They're not just like a continuation of the old, right? So imagine the end of the Roman Empire again. The Christians are not the same. For the Romans, work is for slaves. For the Christians, work is a way to make the world a better place. Ora et labora, work and pray. And they create these monastic communities where they do farming, crafts, intellectual work, and prayer in one integrated community. And they heal the land doing this, and they recreate agriculture after it had been destroyed. But the thing is, they react against the failing system from before. So you have this hedonistic Roman system, and the Christians are ascetic. They react against the old, right? So you have to also to imagine that young people may emerge who have absolutely not the same hopes and experience that you have, right? I mean, I'm 66. I have known social democratic Europe. I was a very poor working class kid, and I had free education, free medical care. My parents had a zero interest loan to buy a 3-story house with a garden. Young people have not experienced that. They have experienced the destruction of the welfare state. they don't trust the state,
Hmm.
right? So we shouldn't assume that the people who are dominant now, who tend to be older, will have the same mentality of young people. And again, depends maybe where you live. If you're young in Europe, you lived in 2008, up to 50% unemployment in Spain and in France, right? That creates a different way of thinking. And you see it in the US where young people moved to the populist parties in the last election with big, big swings, from every color and every towards Trump. We can agree or disagree with this, but this is a reaction, right? It's a
Right.
reaction against how they see what is wrong. And what they see is, oh, the Democratic Party has been in power for a long time, and that's not what we want. And so they shift, they bifurcate in the other direction. I'm not saying it's the right direction, but I'm just trying to explain the dynamics that play when you enter into crisis.
Right, right. I think also the part of the reasons, a big reasons of why I wanted to start this podcast is also to kind of really understand the changes that are happening. There are just so many changes that are happening at such a fast pace. It's hard to get your mind around what our place in history and where we go from here. So I think it's really important to give people that sense of hope and also understanding of where we are in history and how we can get to where we want going forward. So, based on what we have discussed so far, what's the ideal kind of world future that you see?
Let me first maybe explain how I cope and how many people can cope with this. So there's a famous book called Man in Search of Meaning
Yes.
by Viktor Frankl, right? He lived in the concentration camps and came out of it. And he said there's only two kinds of people who survived in the concentration camps: the communists and the Catholics, right? The Catholics, because they have spiritual trend, they have a vertical dimension, and they can say, this is just a relative world. The real world is, after I die, and then if I behave ethically, I will go back to the divine. Communists didn't believe in that, but they projected utopia in the future, right? This is bad, but we'll eventually we'll win and we create a perfect society in the future. So they kind of horizontalized that transcendence into the future. I think both are genuine strategies. And look at history. First we had world religions, and they wanted to make the world a better place. Then, at least in the West, people stopped believing. Starting in the 16th century, and we created mass secular movements like communism, fascism, liberalism, and we put our faith in the future. Because we lived in a mass industrial society, we did this through mass politics. The new generation is different, right? I think Web3 is a similar community of faith, not a religion, but they have faith in decentralization. They don't have faith in the state, and they don't have faith in big capitalistic enterprise either. But they have faith in entrepreneurship, individual initiative, peer-to-peer coordination, and all these new values, right? And so Web3 is a way to project yourself into the future and building infrastructure so that you can have the life you want. So I see this as a positive. I'm not saying they're going to succeed. I don't know, but I think it's positive that they're able to project themselves in a constructive future. And so that's what I would do today, either locally, like, okay, where can I get organic food, renewable energy, resilient production, and make sure that I'm more safe in times of volatility, because maybe the state is not going to be able to help me. And then cosmically, universally, can I join a global knowledge community where I can learn that makes me stronger individually and collectively? And so ideally, the combination of both. And, there's no guarantee, but I think if you build something, you can be optimistic. It's like the caterpillar and the butterfly, right? If you're the caterpillar, you're gonna actually become mush. You're gonna completely dissolve. And if that's your reality, it's terrible. But if you know that you have these DNA things in your that will actually create a butterfly, and you anticipate a butterfly, then you can actually remain optimistic because however bad it's gonna be, actually in the future, we'll come out of it, right? And maybe we'll come out of it in a better and more complex and more just society than we have now. And that's worth hoping for. Again, success is never guaranteed, but I think it is something that can give you like moral strength.
Right. Basically, it all comes down to hope. A very hope is it's different from wish, right? It's a very real kind of it's not just an emotion, but more of a way to kind of how you
Hope
want to
with
move things
evidence, right?
forward.
Hope with evidence, concrete utopias, right? Not like after revolution, everything will be better. I mean, we tried that and that didn't really work very well. But like hope that is based on things that you can actually grasp, right? Like I'm building a co-op, I'm building this, I'm doing that. I have a community of people who agree with me and we have solidarity. That's different. It's hope with evidence.
Right,
And
right.
it gives you agency.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Um, I think we kind of talk about the you mentioned about P2P and commons. Do you think we address the two clearly, or
Yeah,
do
so
you think there's
peer-to-peer
more to?
is the capacity. Sorry. So peer-to-peer is the capacity to organize translocally as peers. So I'm not selling my labor to you. I'm finding common ground with you, and then we freely associate to make something together, and hopefully we can create an economy around that. And in practice we can, and we've done it many times, right? If it's like a startup, if you can hang on long enough, eventually people will congregate around you and create an economy around your open source activity. It's already in 2011, the free software sector was 16% of the US economy and 70 million workers making a living doing, either directly open source or working in sectors that depend on open source. So that's not imaginary. This is a real, now already an established part of the modern economy. And crypto again, it's $3 trillion. It's not nothing. Yeah, I lost my thread now. Sorry.
Okay. I think
Yes, the commons. And the
yes.
commons is so, okay, you have a network of peers. How do you become strong? By having your own commons to rely on. Common code, common design, common protocols, funding that you can decide collectively. And, now we have the tools in Web3,
Yes.
like quadratic voting, quadratic funding. We actually know how to make collective decisions to direct funding streams, and we've been doing it for a few years now. So this is can always be better, but it works well enough. And so that's the commons, right? You have an organized network, but it's backed up by these common resources. And what I imagine is the following. So you have an alliance of community land trusts, say, right? They ally together, they have a commons, and they can invest in their global commons, and global commons can attract funding to invest in the local commons. And so they become entangled. They
Mm.
become one cosmolocal entity that is able to mobilize force and money and labor into its own priorities.
That's really that's very interesting. And I think when it comes to blockchain technology, Web3, a lot of people are kind of associated with casino culture, Bitcoin, the rise in the surging prices of Bitcoin tends to get the attention of people. But there's, as you said, there's a emerging movement on regenerative, so-called regen kind of a movement that's taking place that probably has much wider implications on how we are going to develop as a civilization. was owed as a
I think
society.
you should see it as the Wild West. First, like America was very violent, and had all kinds of conflicts, and there was no law and order. And then, eventually people created that order, right? And
Mm,
it became a s- not just civilized, but the strongest country in the world. And so I think Web3, originally didn't have rules, didn't know how to protect itself from predators. And so all kinds of things happened and are still happening to a certain degree. But you can also see gradually it's becoming much more organized and ethical. And, especially in DAOs, there's all these rules that are now actually encoded, right? It's encoded in smart contracts that create a new situation. And from having been in the pop-up villages in Chiang Mai, where thousands of people congregated in 12 different tribes that confederated, 20 meetings a day to learn from each other. And then we went to DEF CON with 800 side events. I really did not have the feeling that this was a predatory community. I had a feeling this was a very positive, optimistic, constructive community that really believed in what they were doing
right,
and
right,
wanted to make a positive difference. I'm not saying they will succeed in everything they wish, but I think overall this is being constructive is important. Building something,
right,
that
right.
creates a whole different dynamic than just speculative dynamics, which of course in the beginning there was a lot of that and people doing illegal stuff.
Just for those who are listening who don't understand, kind of there were quite a few words that may be new to people, the audience. Smart contract is basically a software, a blockchain software that can execute on codes, basically, and the
Yeah,
pop up.
the way I see it, it's making things more trustworthy. So, we make an agreement, but if we make an agreement on the blockchain, you can actually specify if I do X and Y, then you do Z, right? And it's kind of triggered automatically, so we don't have to discuss it. And so gradually over time, we can say, oh, okay, let's put this on us and this and this and this and this. And so it creates trust at scale, because that's the real issue, right? So you
Mhm.
look at the history of trust, small groups in kinship, I call it big sister, big brother and little brother, little sister, sorry. So that's like small tribes, right? Then we become empires, big father. We are all afraid of the same God, and so we trust each other. Then we have the nation state, this is big brother. And this is going to be more controversial. I think now we are in big sister, which is kind of like the it's all for your good surveillance state, you know? It's kind of, oh, we protect you from disinformation and, all
Oh,
of that. So
got
it's
it.
kind of like the
See.
female values are in the surveillance state. But I think we can go back to little brother and little sister at scale, right? By this trustless mechanism. It's a paradox, but we're learning as a civilization to trust people that we work with online that are far away from us, and we create mechanisms so that we can actually trust them.
Right. Often in the blockchain space, people talk about permissionless. That's a word I think people outside of the Web3 would not understand. And I love how you just simply kind of translate it to create trust in scale. That's just a very easy way to kind of explain what permissionless smart contract and technology, blockchain technology means. And for so basically DEF CON, you also mentioned DEF CON developer conference. That's Ethereum's biggest conference that took place in Bangkok, Thailand. And before that, there were pop-up village in Chiang Mai. And you can share a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I find it absolutely amazing. So I had been before. So I'd been to Suzalu, Montenegro. This was the first pop-up village ever, in which Vitalik Buterin, who is the founder of Ethereum, and Ethereum, for those people who don't know what it is, it's an attempt to create a global decentralized world computer. So Web 1 was peer to peer, Web 2 brought back the control of big companies, and Web 3 wants to go back to Web 1, but with protection, so that it cannot happen again. And so the problem, of course, is with all that trustlessness is that, well, you don't know who these people are. And we want to know people, want to have friends. So Zuzalu Montenegro was the first attempt to bring people together, in one place so they can become friends. You create a common culture, you can make plans together, and you physically meet. That was so successful that it exploded in, I don't know, 50, 70 different pop-up villages. So I went to something called Zoo Connect Istanbul. Then I went to Esmeralda, HCD Esmeralda in California, in Hillsburg. And, in Hillsburg, you had 1,000 people, 17 events per day for a month. And I found it very impressive because the amount of learning that can happen in this context, this is what I call Civium, right? So the word Civium, what it means is that, so this is from a book called Scale from Geoffrey West. He says, some relations are superlinear. What that means is you lose efficiency through scaling. So a human body, a baby, when it doubles in size, the brain only augments with 85%. So you lose efficiency through scaling. But a city, if you double a city, you have 115% more innovation. I'm not sure how they calculate that, but that's his calculation. And so that's why cities are so important because, you have an exponential rise of potential connections, right? So in theory, it would be much more, but actually you realize 150% of them. But Civium is the equivalent in outside of the city. We can now create temporary villages where we have a very, very, very high degree of interconnection and innovation, and we can move them around. But we can also make them permanent, right? We could have villages that function that way and that stay in one place. So that's the idea of Civium, is that we will need less and less to have cities, that we can go back relatively to smaller places and have more convivial lifestyle. And this is the old dream of humanity. This is really what we want, to live with our loved ones and people we trust and love around us. This is what we want. And we, for 5,000 years, we try to get back to it. Yeah, and so this is what happened in Chiang Mai. So 12 different of these villages came together, organized themselves separately, but also created a confederation. They called it the Chiang Mai Archipelago. So remember, if each of them can do 17 per day, imagine what 12 can do. They have their own, and then they also make bridges with each other. So the cultural building, the community building, the friendship creation that took place in 1 month was just beyond my wildest dreams. It was really impressive. And then all that crowd went then to Bangkok, where DEFCON is so every 2 years you have a big event, and every 4 years it's called DEFCON. 10,800 side events. I mean, the scale of the Ethereum society economy is just tremendous. And the energy and the positive energy is not something you easily find anywhere else in the world today, where, to be honest, a lot of people are very pessimistic, are depressed, have mental issues. It's skyrocketing in the West. Not there. Not there. These are like high energy, high optimistic, highly educated individuals that put their energy to create a life that they want and a world that they want to make better.
Hmm. You mentioned earlier about in case someone wants to be part of this kind of movement or change. You mentioned about eat responsibly, and also joining a global knowledge community. What else? What more that one can do?
It's not so easy because originally, it's a coding community. So it's kind of a convergence between capital and coding, right? That's through Bitcoin. A lot of people, so it's in a way, it's an exit strategy first, where people who think that the financial system is in danger. A lot of people with money believe that the fiat currency world eventually is going to collapse. So that, they expect like a big crunch in the US because there's so much credit that's being created. So they're kind of do arbitrage of nation states, and they use Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, to make it's like digital gold, right? And that's an exit strategy. That's not necessarily something to make the world a better place. It's just like this is how I think I can survive, right? And then the coders, digital nomads, highly educated people who can code, they're the ones that are needed to create this new infrastructure. And so that's the first step, right? So notice, for example, one of the difficulties is that women actually don't code that much. There's only 20% of women doing computer science, and it's going down. And yet, I can tell you, at least in Chiang Mai, at least 30% of the people were female. So, what do? They do all kinds of things. They write, they do marketing jobs, they organize the community. There's a whole well being and care focus in these Web3 communities that's often organized by females. Of course, there are female coders as well. And so it was actually much more diverse than I expected. And I also went to a meeting called Global Majority. So this is an alliance of Web3 people from Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And their priority is how can we have infrastructures in our countries that are as good as the ones that they have in the West? How can we have more Web3 in our, what, they consider the global majority because 80% of the world population lives there, right? But yeah, it takes some time to get in. I only got in a year and a half ago, and now everybody knows me in Web3. I'm one of the intellectuals thinking about it, and I was, in panels with Vitalik Buterin and Kevin Nowacki, really the big names. So that was very satisfying for me that I could do this. But it's complex, and it's a culture that for people from my generation is very, very weird. It's just weird. I often say, wow, what is this? And everybody's going, they're dipping in ice cold water in the morning and they talk about longevity and it's weird. It's weird.
Yeah, okay. For those who are
It's
not,
fun, but weird. It's weird, but fun. Yeah.
it's very eye-opening experience so far for me. I've been in the space for 7 years. I guess I would suggest those who are listening who wants to kind of learn kind of this new movement, maybe just read up on the information out there. That's the beginning, and also try to attend some of the online conferences that you don't have to invest any money. And in terms of coding, the previous episode, I interviewed a blockchain VC who talked about how AI has changed the ability to code, right? Because now basically you open up new doors to people who don't know how to code, but they want to still build something. It's all made possible now. So for those who want to learn more, I think just reading up informations and kind of explore different online communities also, that would be possible. Um, Before we wrap up the conversation, anything else you think that would be good to share with the listeners?
Well, I mean, I know you're going to put it in the show notes, but I'm just
Yes.
mentioning that I have a very elaborate wiki. So in that sense, I'm still a librarian. I'm a cybrarian. I'm a librarian of cyberspace, right? I add, 5 to 15 items a day. I've been doing this for 15 years. So we have 25,000 articles which have been viewed a billion times. That is very finely organized in sections. So crypto economy, crypto governance, crypto technology, crypto ecology, for example, in this space, but also new forms of, commons-based property, commons-based governance. How does P2P and commons affect agriculture, transportation, housing? It's all in there. 15 years of experience. So that's one thing. And then I write my more speculative, like a futuristic expectations in a Substack called Fourth Civilization Substack. And I reply to everything. So if you email me, you WhatsApp me, Signal, Telegram, I'd be happy to connect with anyone. Also, M Bauwens on Twitter. I'm still there, doing digital curation.
Great.
And
Great.
I live in Chiang Mai. Everybody's welcome.
Great. I'll put those information in the show notes. And yeah, thank you, listeners, for joining us and let us know what you think about the show. And thank you, Michel, for sharing your insight. Really appreciate it. See you next time.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. I enjoyed, talking with you, and I think you create a really nice atmosphere in your podcast. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Today's conversation with Michel takes us to the heart of Progress Reimagined. His vision of a fourth civilization emerging through the chaos of our current transitions offers both challenge and hope. Like a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly, our society may be going through a messy but necessary metamorphosis. The signs are already here. From pop-up villages experimenting with new forms of community to blockchain technologies enabling new ways of working together to what Michel calls Cosmolocal collaboration. These are seeds of a fundamentally new way for humans to coordinate and cooperate. What makes Michel's perspective so valuable is his combination of deep historical understanding with practical observation of emerging trends. He offers hope with evidence, not just wishful thinking, but concrete examples of new possibilities emerging around the world. I decided to start this channel because I felt that there were many problems around the world and I wanted to do something about it. We actually got to cover that, and his advice is really valuable. For those of you looking to make a difference, find the problems that energize you to solve. We're at a unique moment in history where each of us can play a crucial role in shaping what comes next. You can explore more of Michel's work through his wiki and his Fourth Civilization Substack. Links are in the show notes. This is Kathleen Chu. You've been listening to Progress Reimagined.